Hey guys, it's Courtney from Soul Deep Devotions. I am doing a video devotion to kind of ease us back into the swing of being together every Tuesday. Thank you for the long hiatus, the long break, so that I could get the website back together. It is now live. It's beautiful, and after this video is done, feel free to head on over and take a look because it has taken so long, and so I would love for you to just kind of appreciate it for what it is. So while I've been away, I've been studying Exodus, the book of Exodus in the Bible. And I want to kind of jump back in talking about the portion of Exodus where Moses confronts Pharaoh multiple times to let the people go, and Pharaoh refuses to let Israel go from their slavery in Egypt. Namely, I want to focus on the plagues that the Lord sends in order to try and get Pharaoh to kind of wake up to his rebellion and release Israel from their slavery. So I don't know about you. I never thought about it before. It kind of just always took for granted that the plagues happened because God wanted them to happen that way. I thought that they were maybe a little bit random. I didn't think that there was a reason for the Nile turning to blood, frogs, lice, things like that. I kind of just thought that that was a story. It just happened that way. I never put any thought into the fact that the plagues were very intentional and that each specific thing happened for a reason. So, first of all, why did the plagues happen? The plagues happened, in my opinion, because in Exodus 5, the first time Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh says no. So Moses approaches Pharaoh and says, let the Israelites go so that we can go into the wilderness, we can go into the land and sacrifice and worship the Lord. Pharaoh's response in Exodus 5 verse 2 is, "Who is the Lord?" So Pharaoh answers in sort of a mocking tone, "Who is the Lord?" Like he's never heard of him. Almost in a sense, like Pharaoh believes that the God of the Israelites is this pitiful nobody, and that Pharaoh is higher than him, so he doesn't have to pay any mind to this God, and he doesn't have to allow the people to go and worship him. So in my opinion, the way I read it, the way I interpret it, is that these plagues happen because A, God is trying to move the heart of Pharaoh, but Pharaoh kind of provokes the Lord by saying, "Who is the Lord? Why should I let you go and worship him?" So in a lot of ways, the plagues are a direct response to that question, "Who is the Lord?" And God says multiple times throughout as the plagues go on that these things are happening so that God's glory might be displayed in all of Egypt to all the people and for generations to come. So these plagues are so that the Egyptian people will A, know who the Lord is, and B, not forget him for generations to come. So I kind of want to just go through each plague and open this up for you and show you the things that I learned, because the really cool thing is that Pharaoh, a man who was thought to be a god himself, Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord?" And so the Lord kind of proves him wrong with 10 different things about how much more powerful our God is than Pharaoh. But he also challenges and targets each Egyptian god with a plague to kind of undermine them and prove them to be less powerful than who God is. So the first plague was the Nile turning to blood. In that time, the Egyptians worshipped the Nile as a god itself because their culture was so centered around the Nile. They received their water from it. The city centered around it. There was wildlife that lived around the Nile. The Nile was a big part of their culture, and so they revered the Nile, the river Nile, as a god itself. But it also affected Khnum, or Num, the guardian of the Nile, which was an Egyptian god. It also affected Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, and Osiris, who was an Egyptian god that was said that the Nile was his physical bloodstream. So God turning the Nile from water, which the Egyptians depended on, and very much revered as sacred, into blood, was a way that God could show that he was more powerful than the Nile and all of these gods that are connected to the Nile and are supposed to be protectors, guardians, draw their strength from it. So that's the first plague. The second plague was frogs, which targets Heket, who is always depicted with the head of a frog. Frogs in this time were common around the Nile, so again, it's kind of a diss to Nile gods. But they were also considered sacred animals and could not be killed. So when the frogs came to Egypt in such a high volume, the people could not kill these frogs. They couldn't just, kill them and get them to go away from them. The Egyptian people were sort of bound to this plague because they were not religiously, they were not allowed to kill these frogs. They were a sacred animal. They were a symbol of rebirth due to their rapid reproduction rates of frogs reproducing, but they were also considered to be of two worlds because they're birthed in water and they end up a land animal. Sorry. So plague 2 targets Heket, a rebirth god, or a god that symbolized reproductive growth. The third plague and the fourth plague kind of go hand in hand. The third plague is gnats and lice, and the fourth plague is flies. The reason these plagues go hand in hand is because Egyptian culture regarded cleanliness as a central ideology to their religious workings. So what the heck do I mean by that? The Egyptians valued cleanliness above all else when it came to sacrificing to their gods. So if they were unclean, if the priests in their their Egyptian temples, whatever, those leaders were unclean, if the sacrifice itself was unclean, you couldn't sacrifice it to the gods. So because of the lice and the flies, it made these people and the animals, that's important to note, is that this plague affected the animals as well. It made it impossible for Egypt to sacrifice. It effectively halted Egypt's entire religious system. They couldn't sacrifice, they couldn't worship because of the uncleanness of the gnats and lice and flies. So it essentially stopped all of the worship to their gods, or they would risk disrespecting them since cleanliness was at the heart of their worship. Additionally, it targets Geb, the god over dust of the earth, and Khepri, which had the head of a beetle, a fly, and moved the sun through the sky. So those two gods were affected by the lice and the flies, which were the third and fourth plagues. The fifth plague is the death of livestock, which is a direct target at Hathor, the fertility goddess, who is depicted with the head or horns of a bull or cow. Also, cows were another sacred animal in Egypt, and dead livestock cannot be offerings. So it relates back to like what I said about the lice and the flies. If your livestock was dead, you couldn't make a sacrifice. So it additionally continued to halt this worship process in Egypt of the Egyptian gods. Number 6, plague 6 was boils, which was targeted at Isis, the goddess of health, and Imhotep, the god of healing. So that the fact that the Egyptians had boils all over their skin, painful boils, that was a diss from God to show that he is more powerful than both of these gods and goddesses of health and healing. The seventh plague, I think the Bible even mentions it, but the seventh plague was possibly the most terrifying of the plagues. It was hail. So Egypt is not a region that generally sees hail. They are unfamiliar really with it because it's obviously too warm to have something like hail. Additionally, the Bible says that the sky had fire in it while it was hailing. So it's literally raining fire and ice on Egypt, and the thunder was loud and the storm was terrifying. So the people are seeing something that they have never seen before, and so the hail was quite a terrifying thing for them to encounter. But also the hail took out the crops in the field that were not already destroyed from prior plagues, and the hail plague was a target, or a diss to the goddess of the sky. Her name was Nut, and her father Shu, the god of wind and air, who was also known to be a calming god. So because this storm obviously upset most of Egypt, the calming god was proven to be not as powerful as God. Otherwise the people would have been calm. The eighth plague is locusts. This goes against Neper and Nepri, the god and goddess of grain, because the locusts ate up whatever was left of the vegetation in Egypt. So they weren't going to have a harvest. They weren't going to have any kind of grain. I'm trying to speed up here because I know I'm going long. The ninth plague was darkness over Egypt, and it was a darkness that could be felt, is what the Bible said. So it was more than just a physical darkness. It was, in many ways, the withdrawal of even God's presence itself. It was a darkness that could be seen and felt. And that goes against Ra, the sun god, who was the most worshipped and revered god in Egypt after Pharaoh. So that shows that God had power over even the mightiest of the Egyptians' gods. And then, of course, the 10th plague, which was Passover, or the establishment of the institution of Passover, and the firstborn plague, where the firstborns of Egypt, if you didn't have the Passover blood over your doorway, that the angel of death came and took the firstborn of every family in Egypt. So that plague essentially was a judgment on all of the gods of Egypt, up to and including Pharaoh, because his son died in that plague, his firstborn son. It was also, if you think about it, a penalty for Pharaoh killing the sons of Israel in trying to quell their population in chapters 1 and 2, where Pharaoh says to, the midwives and guards that the newborn sons should be thrown into the Nile to try and quell their population. That this plague of taking the firstborns, number 10, is the penalty, some scholars think, for Pharaoh doing that in the opening chapters of Exodus. But in a culture that was so ingrained in the firstborn, it was tradition that the firstborn should have certain inheritance rights, and things of that nature. To take away the firstborn of these families was a devastating loss for Egypt. And so all that to say, why did all this happen? Because Pharaoh literally had the audacity to say, "Who is God?" As if he were some pitiful nobody. And in Exodus 11:9, God says that Egypt will know my power because of these plagues, and they will know it for generations to come. So what does that mean for us today? It means that God will prove his power and his might and display that to the world, to a world that rebels and hardens themselves from him. This world has nothing in it that can overpower or overcome God. It's just impossible. He is the same God that sent all these plagues. He is the same God that proved himself more powerful than all of the gods of Egypt, up to and including Pharaoh himself. He is the same God today, and he always will be the same God. So today I just really wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the plagues were not random. They were so intentional. They were very much for a purpose, and God used them to basically annihilate any kind of belief that the Egyptians could have had that their gods were legitimate and more powerful than the God of Israel, the one true God. And it's the same for us today. There is no idol. There is no other God. There is no other thing that you can put over God and call it more mighty than him, or more powerful than him, or stronger than him, or more benevolent than him. God is just the end-all be-all. And that is the God that we serve. The God that would literally send 10 plagues just to show how wrong Egypt was in worshiping these bogus gods. So I hope that encourages you today. I hope that maybe, blew your mind a little bit, because who would have thought? I certainly didn't. But maybe that's just me. So I hope you enjoyed that. If that kind of piqued your interest, you can always send me an email or send me a message. We can talk about it, discuss it, get into further stuff about it. The contact email for this site is souldeepdevos, DEVOS, @gmail.com. Once this video is done, please head over to the website so that you can see all of the hard work that I have been putting into it for the past few weeks. It is a beautiful website, it's responsive, and I love it. So take a few moments to head over there and click around and take a look. If you would like to connect on social media, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's very easy to get in contact with me. Other than that, have a good Tuesday. Sorry I went so long, but it was a very interesting topic to me. And yeah, have a great day. Bye, guys.